Chapter 441. Find the Duke. The barrage of mortar rounds alerted the defenders in town that there was a ground battle occurring in the distance, and General Aledo prepared to send troops to relieve what could only be Dominic's force. "General, are you sure that they need our help? I hear a lot of explosions. That has to be more than just the Duke and a handful of trolls," one of the town guard officers asked. "Trust me, that's him. The force isn't large enough to be anyone else, and only the Duke would use mortars on goblins like that." The soldiers laughed. The old man had a point. The mortars could tear through the ranks of even level 5 monsters like hobgoblins, kobolds, and such. But someone was blasting apart a horde of common goblins with them. Ammunition was a limited resource, and only the Duskblade sect and a few members of the guard force had an orb to make them. With the mortars, the goblin charge was stalled until the last of the ogres fell to the trolls, who were now moving to defend their smaller companions. Sweeping strikes of their spiked clubs coated with a lightning bolt spells not only shattered bones, but fried the goblins alive. Their battles had rapidly improved the spell gems, as the trolls had focused all their loot on the one task. Now they were sweeping aside the goblins like they were sweeping up dirt. "To our left, there is an organized force coming our way," Dominic warned Amy. Leaving the trolls to defend them from the goblins, the pair focused their attacks on the incoming Yeti clan. Mana pistol rounds shattered against both Ice Element and Area Barrier type spells, revealing that there were mages with a force, and Dominic smiled. They had been looking for the leadership of the enemy force, and now it was coming right to them. The fire element bonuses on the pistols were especially effective against the Yeti warriors, and Dominic was using Arcane Blast to keep his mana up, while Amy used one pistol with mana regeneration. He really did need to make her a custom one in her size, it just looked wrong to have different-sized pistols. With a dozen dead in seconds, the Yeti paused, and the mages behind them came forward to deal with the threat. "One elder and a bunch of acolytes," Dominic noted. The acolytes would be no problem, but the elder should be an experienced combatant with stronger magic than they could easily deal with. "War criminal of the Wavemates clan, surrender, and we will make your death a quick one," the elder announced, his voice booming with magical emphasis. "Hey, I've heard that line before." Amy giggled. Dominic smiled, slowly lit a mortar on his horn, and gave it an underhanded lob toward the mages before unloading his pistols into the elder's barrier. The spell flared blue with power, and Dominic noted how it wavered under the barrage. So, the elder was at least 10 levels stronger than his pistols. That was manageable. At least it wasn't 20 levels. He raised his hands, and a massive spell circle formed in the air above Dominic's head. Amy cursed and began frantically casting something, while Dominic reloaded and continued to fire into the barrier. The acolytes were turning pale in the face as they expended every bit of their energy to keep the defensive shield up. It wasn't enough. The barrier shattered just as a massive bolt of lightning hit Dominic's area barrier, shattering it and sending shocks through both his arms. "We need to move," Amy shouted. The spell was still active, and more lightning was crashing into the area. Dominic dodged as he felt the air crackle around him, and a lightning strike hit where he was a half-second earlier. From the ground, he unloaded both pistols into the elder's barrier, and the final few shots hit the mage in the chest and shoulder. A wave of blood erupted from his mouth as the mage coughed, and then the spell overhead vanished. The acolyte closest to the elder rushed to pour a potion into his mouth, but Amy was not going to let that happen, and the bottle shattered in his hand. A flurry of gunfire took out the surviving acolytes, and Dominic breathed a sigh of relief as he checked the elder's body. Dead for certain, but he had the foresight to not bring anything but a single storage ring with him. There would be no good loot, Dominic knew. If the elder knew not to bring more than one storage item, he knew not to bring any of his true valuables, and would only have what was needed for the mission with him. Well, that was fun, Amy joked as she caught her breath. Trying to suppress that lightning array had taken a lot out of her, and she still hadn't been successful. If it wasn't for the fact that Magitech pistols were faster and higher damage than most spells, they would have been in real trouble. Still, he took the ring, while Amy checked the acolytes for valuables. Then, they both returned their attention to the goblin horde, which was currently attempting to take down the group of trolls. It was almost laughable. The massive creatures had cuts all over their legs, which were healing at a visible pace, and goblins were flying in every direction as the trolls smashed their way through the tide. Dominic returned to hurling mortars into the goblins, as it was faster than casting fireballs, with a nearly equivalent blast radius. That let the trolls knock the goblins away from their legs for a moment and get back to fighting only in front of them, instead of being swarmed. Dominic heard shouting in the distance. "Clear the tide, push forward to the Duke." General Aleda was calling as he led a militia unit forward with spears. They were getting closer, so Dominic switched from mortars back to magic. He couldn't risk the shrapnel wounding his own people, and the blast radius of a mortar was much less defined than that of a fireball. Trolls, meet up with the locals. We can fight in one big group. Chapter 442. Root of the issue. Having over a dozen mountain trolls in their ranks immediately emboldened the militia once the two groups had joined. The trolls smashed everything in front of them, while the militia used spears to keep the monsters from getting too close to the trolls or surrounding the group. With Dominic and Amy firing from the flanks, it was a beautiful tactic, and they weren't even being hard-pressed anymore. Keep the monsters out from under the trolls' feet. As long as you keep them at club range, they will take care of the hard work. Dominic instructed as he reloaded his pistols. General Aleda barked orders to the militiamen, and Dominic smiled as the old general settled back into his element. When he had arrived here, he was a retired man, his wealth long spent to support his family, and his glory years, decades past. But now, as the head of training for the militia, he was really showing why he deserved the title of general. It was a bit odd to use the title in a small town, especially in reference to the head of the militia, but retired or not, he still deserved the rank. Under his directions, the militiamen kept the goblins they were currently facing from getting a single solid hit on the trolls, who happily swung their clubs over the line of spears, aiming for heads. They were quite pleased with the spear line tactic. "Do we have any updates on the situation near the airship docks?" General Aleda asked. Dominic shrugged, then handed him the portable radio from his storage. "You listen for reports, I've got both hands full." The old man chuckled as he turned the Magitech radio on, and a constant stream of orders and reinforcement requests burst from the speakers. The army units had things mostly under control, but there were still open portals spewing more monsters at them, and the airships reported a dome of magic in the back lines, where the mages had set up a command station. They were headed that way, but the general wasn't sure that they had the firepower to actually do what needed to be done when they got there. If possible, a continual bombardment by a pair of gunships would be best to keep the defensive barrier weakened. But trying to request it when they were needed all over the region wouldn't be easy. Plus, their unit was incredibly small. Priority would be given to a full regiment who had a better chance of success. Well, a better chance of success by standard metrics. The logic behind those metrics rarely applied to Dominic, and while he was out here with Amy, it was even less relevant. With high-level Magitech weapons, they had a clear advantage over the traditional mages who might be leading the invasion, and only someone on the level of an archmage would be able to overcome their barrage. "Once we get close enough that we are free of the monsters, I will set a beacon for the sect. A strike team should be enough to break the barrier, and then we can work on taking out the mages." Amy explained. "That works for me. General, sorry to do this to your militia, but we will need them with us a while longer." General Aleda saluted in response, simply accepting that his team had drawn the short straw this time. If the Duke thought that he could stop the monster invasion by taking out the mages, then it was their duty to make sure he got there. At least he hadn't asked them to do it alone. They had the trolls on their side. "Boss, they're sending big goblins to us," Dave announced, his deep trollish voice rumbling like rocks grinding together. "I see them. Did you want to smash them, or should I blow them up?" The troll took half a second to decide. "Blow them up." Amy laughed as Dominic lit and hurled another grenade. "You're going to wear a groove in your horn doing that. We should make you an igniter to wear as a decoration." Dominic winked at her. "It regenerates." Amy turned her pistols on the hobgoblins, keeping them from getting close enough to slow the advance of the trolls, while General Aleda guided the militia to defend their formation and marveled at Dominic's throwing arm. Sure, he had strength bonuses, but the Duke should have played professional sports with aim like that. The rippling explosions were attracting more attention from the monsters, and the horde of goblins and hobgoblins was still growing, despite the thousands of bodies on the ground. So many had been killed that the militia had to walk carefully, as every step was on top of a corpse as they advanced, and you never knew when a goblin could have something sharp on them. Amy frowned at Dominic. We're not going to make it to the mages at this rate. Dominic didn't respond right away. He just listened to the radio reports blaring out from the pack on the general's back. I don't think that we need to. The armies are pushing outward from the city now, and within the hour they'll likely be joining us. Just keep doing what we're doing, and don't forget to loot as many corpses as we can. Amy smiled. Can't forget about the loot. I hate to dim your optimism, but if we keep pushing forward, we're going to be surrounded. General Aeleda warned. A group of goblins had detached from another fight, and they were coming from the right side, while the horde in front of them was spreading out. The general was right. They were going to be surrounded. This is what the army calls a target-rich environment, I believe. Amy nodded. Poor bastards are about to have us surrounded. We'll be able to kill them everywhere we look. The militia laughed at the thought. The two of them were insane, but their confidence was infectious. You have a plan, right? Standard tactic is a turtle shell spear wall. Aeleda replied. Of course. Amy, you have a plan, right? The little mage rolled her eyes. Yes, I have an area of effect spell for this situation. But I am a mage. I can just use area barrier to keep the goblins at bay while we kill them. Chapter 443. Join the defense. Using a barrier to keep the militia safe didn't sound nearly as fun, so Dominic took a moment away from throwing to make a new batch of mortars with a much larger explosive radius. They wouldn't have the power to reliably kill a hobgoblin at longer ranges, but the shrapnel would tear apart goblins with ease. Duke Dominic, do you have a radio? We need a situation report. A voice crackled from the speaker. General Aeleda held up the microphone for Dominic to speak as he dumped mortars into his storage bag. We are on the outer edge of the attack, working our way to the leadership position. Currently engaged with goblins. Situation is stable. Understood. Units are moving to support. Dominic started to throw his new batch of shrapnel mortars into the goblins, starting with the group coming from the side. The longer that they could avoid being surrounded and bogged down, the better. However, they wouldn't be a problem much longer. A volley of cannon fire exploded among the goblins, shredding hundreds at a time, as a support airship was sent to their position. Now we're talking. Amy, focus forward. I will work with the airship to keep the others from pinning us down. One airship was not going to be nearly enough for the task, and now that they were getting closer to the battle, the enemy didn't have to extend themselves to attack, which meant their forward formation was less effective, and they were slowly shifting to form a circle. A large one, as they needed room for over a dozen trolls to fight, but the outcome was inevitable. Aeleda gave the orders, shifting the troops as goblins swarmed around their position, and Amy's gunshots came to a halt as she brought up an area barrier around their position, keeping the goblins from charging past the spears. More bright ideas? She asked. How strong is that barrier? You're not throwing grenades on our own position. Pick another method. Dominic shrugged. It should have worked. The back ranks of the horde have already been thinned. Just let Dave keep cutting them down, and we will be free again in a moment. Throwing fragmentation mortar rounds into the horde helped with that, but Dominic could hear from the radio that the monsters here were getting too thin to continue the bombardment, and the airship was about to move on. Sure enough, the goblins were forced to group on one side of the formation, as they were dying too fast if they attacked individually. That gave the formation a chance to spread out a little, with Amy expanding her barrier. And only minutes later, she lowered it and returned to shooting with fireball, spells attached, as the spearmen pushed out and spread into an offensive arc. They had been training for that movement since the first day they got spears, and today they got the chance to prove its worth to themselves. They weren't highly equipped professional soldiers, but they could do this. With increased confidence came reduced hesitation, and the practice was showing them the best ways to kill goblins. The militia followed Dominic's lead as he blasted the goblins off their flanks and focused the attack on one point again. They were moving forward again, headed for the mages. But not alone. On their right, An Axbridge army unit was also moving through the monsters, and soon the two groups would meet, forming a longer spear line. He couldn't see the map of the battlefield, but from the airship reports, it sounded like the horde had been forced off most of the city now, and they were being corralled around the barrier full of mages, which was now under attack by airships. The mages didn't have the range with their magic to fight back when the airships were thousands of meters away, letting ballistics drop cannon fire on top of the barrier. All they could do was wait for the monsters to run out and the Westover forces to reach them. Wagers on whether they break before or after we reach the shield? Amy asked as she saw a clear path to the enemy commanders. Support on the left. Dave shouted, turning Dominic's attention. There was a whole unit of trolls coming, not Dave's, ones from the village in many sizes, armed with makeshift weapons and reclaimed weapons from other monsters. Support on the right, too. Amy agreed. Dominic could see blonde hair and shining armor in the unit with more Daves, so it should be Princess Alexis and her guards, along with the town guards. The battle had turned, and now the monsters were being forced back to their portals. Dominic could already sense the headache that rebuilding all these farmhouses and replanting fields would be, especially in the rainy season. But as he blasted his way through the goblins, he noticed that the houses looked intact. With the monsters under the control of the mages, they hadn't targeted the farmhouses, only living things. So, the biggest threat to the farms was stomping feet and some asshole who tossed explosives everywhere he went. As long as the farmers had mostly made it to safety, the rebuilding process shouldn't be too bad. The leader of the troll village waved as his group came to join Dominic's, and Dave waved back with a huge smile on his face. The boss gave us lightning. The troll declared as the reinforcements joined them. The village chief laughed and nodded. He gave us a village. That was a generous way to put it. Dominic had just agreed not to mess with them as long as they didn't settle too close to town, where it would panic the locals. But the trolls were far more civilized than he had expected, and they had even come to the rescue of Westover without being forced, or even called. Come to the back, and I will hand out good weapons from the dead monsters. Dominic shouted before the new group could get into combat. If they were going to fight for the duchy, they could do it with good weapons. After the battle was over, Dominic would make full armor for Dave, then the trolls wouldn't have as many issues with goblins attacking their lower body. But they were so happy with their spiked clubs that he didn't have the heart to tell them to switch to a magical weapon. He did have hundreds of minotaur blades left after all. Chapter 444. Will they stay? With the extra trolls and the army joining their flank, the fight turned into a steady advance toward the barrier, which was still steadily deploying more monsters. Then, the mages made a fatal mistake. Whatever spell they were using to find monsters had gathered them 200 swamp trolls, short and long-armed monsters who typically covered themselves in moss, mud, and swamp grass to keep their skin from drying out in the sun. They left the barrier like everything else, but when they got near the front, they just turned around and started attacking the monsters around them. Trolls were challenging to control, and once they understood that all the other trolls were fighting in the other direction, they just turned around and changed teams. They didn't have a proper swamp around here for them to live in, but they might be fine in the forest if they survived this battle. The troll village could get them settled if they needed. Now, their numbers were rapidly expanding, and the swamp trolls were even healing the wounded. It was devastating to the enemy, even if the militia didn't trust monsters who had only changed sides 2 minutes earlier. Amy frowned and stopped walking, which caused Dominic to stop with her. There is a living puppet in that group, she whispered. And only a few powerful necromancers can use that spell. It's not easy to clone the soul of a living creature to create puppets. I think that I know who we are up against. She replied quietly. Someone your sect has met before? Amy shook her head. Not directly, though some surely have. The king of Shersdonia is a necromancer lord, over level 50, from what I have heard. I think that he is the one who has been supporting Prince Kaizan, and who is summoning all these monsters. It even explains the blood ritual that we couldn't break. Blood magic is a branch of the necromantic arts. The problem is that, other than the mages from one sect in his country, there is no way to tie any of this directly to him. At best, we can tie it to his nation. But he will just throw the sect to the vultures if they become a diplomatic issue. Dominic sighed. Plausible deniability, the fallback of every national leader. Dagos was vehemently anti-mage, but that was because of the non-human aspect. But necromancers were humans who had learned a forbidden art. If Kaizen had managed to control Dagos, Skipple would be stuck between two hostile allied nations, and the two could work together to control a huge portion of the northern shore, which would truly landlock Axbridge. Well, not anymore, as Axbridge was working with Mitfield and Signia, who both had large coastlines on the eastern side of the continent. But at the start of the war, it made perfect sense. The question was if the support was ongoing, or if it had been a limited agreement. If it was ongoing, this could be much more like a proxy war than fallout from a civil war. That was something that the politicians would have to sort out on their own. Before the armies could reach them, Dominic felt the power in the area shift as portals began to close, and the mages retreated. Who had money on them running before we touched the barrier? Amy called. The militiamen laughed as the barrier began to crack, now that the Ormstead sect had stopped reinforcing it. That let the armies advance much more quickly, as the flow of monsters had stopped, and the ones left had no outside guidance, only their own instincts to go by. And most species were not masters of tactical thinking. The trolls were celebrating the departure of the mages, who could actually injure them. Most of the monster species hadn't mastered fire, or had no need of it. So, while a goblin camp could be dangerous if they started waving torches around to burn the trolls, the ones that were summoned here were no real danger. That let them rampage with impunity and stock up on monster cores. Village trolls would normally have no need of such things, but Dominic was in Westover, and they knew that they could trade with him. Trading monster cores for the good cooking equipment, blankets, and other housewares was an excellent deal. However, with the number of monster cores available in the region, the price would absolutely plummet. They held great value in the cities because everyone needed them. But what happened when everyone on town had dozens or hundreds of them? More than they could possibly need, even to upgrade spell gems and trade skill cores? They became little more than a trade item. That was far from Dominic's mind as the number of monsters dwindled. He would never have no need for the cores, as they could be stockpiled for crafting and didn't go bad. They could also be used to purchase from the Merchants Guild caravans, who would value them the same as always until they realized just how abundant the cores had become. The army was picking most of them up, which meant that they would be turned in for credit with the officers. But that still left whatever farmers and militia had decided to fight. Whatever, it was fine. Alexis would know what to do about it. There was no heroic last stand. Not that day. Instead, the monsters broke when they realized there was nobody stopping them this time, and the survivors fled off into the wilderness, desperate to get as far from Westover as possible. They would need to be hunted down later, but that was a job for the adventurers. Rogue monsters kept them in business, and business would be good for some time. Colonel Wilkes patted Dominic on the shoulder as the battle came to an end. Good timing. It looks like the baronies are fine, and the town took minimal damage. They were aiming for us, not general destruction. They even left most of the farmhouses. But that's a good thing. If we didn't lose too many people, the recovery shouldn't be too painful. How are things in the industrial district? Wilkes shrugged. Intact, as far as I know. The adventurers started near the warehouses, so they should have been well protected until the army was fully deployed. That was excellent news. Chapter 445. Sweep the area. Once the monsters had fled, all that was left was to do a quick sweep for any that might still be hiding in the area, and then they could inform the locals it was safe to head home and check the damages. Having the infrastructure team still in Westfield was going to be a huge benefit, as there was not only damage to repair but monster corpses to dispose of before the rotting bodies contaminated the fields. In a remote battlefield, they could be left for wild magical beasts, and then nature would take its course, leaving nothing behind after only a few short years. But this was all cultivated farmland. They couldn't wait years for the bodies to decompose, and they certainly didn't want an influx of wild beasts and monsters in the area. But even in tragedy, there is opportunity. Destroyed buildings meant work to rebuild them. Damaged roads meant there was a reason to build better ones. It wasn't all good, as there was lost food storage, damaged equipment, and the immense cost involved, but over time it would allow Westover to become more than it ever was. Before that could happen, there was a lot for Dominic to do to ensure the safety of the budding young city. The next morning started with him staring at a wish list from the militia, the town guard, and his wife. Most of it was replacements for things that had been damaged, but there were also upgrades, like a rush order for rifles that were stronger than the first batch he had given out. Those had been fine for almost everything, and would have been enough in a normal situation. But when the ogres attacked 100 at a time, and the goblins came by the thousands, a bunch of level 10 uncommon grade rifles weren't nearly enough. At least not when the ones using them didn't have additional magic. That really was the defining difference between the forces. The ones that had an abundance of magical aptitude were more than capable of holding off a small army of monsters with only a handful of combatants. Those who had only the weapons provided for them struggled. Not nearly as much as they would have without Dominic loading the locals with much higher than average quality magical weapons, but they still struggled. Dominic's view of the situation, Alexis' outlook on their abilities, and the civilian population's opinion were wildly different on that particular topic. By Dominic's view, they needed stronger weapons and more of them, so that the ones without training as mages would be more likely to survive the attacks. From Alexis' point of view, the militia here was remarkably skilled, and the casualty rates were lower than anyone in military command would believe without verification. But from the viewpoint of the civilians, it was a minor miracle that they had survived this sort of assault with not only their lives, but with most of their homes intact. Similar attacks had been launched on major cities, and they had fallen into lengthy sieges. Only a few had realized that the imbalance here was so extreme that Westover could already count itself as the single most magically capable city in Signia outside the capital. The armories of the city guard and militia had emptied every spear that they could find, and while that might not have been as many as Dominic would have preferred, it was still enough that they could have been counted as a full regiment of the regular army. However, Dominic was already thinking of ways to equip an entire company of riflemen on top of the regiment worth of militia spearmen and the mage tower. But before he got to that, he had to fill an order for the troll village. They had left one representative behind with a big bag of monster cores, so that Dominic could place their request with the Merchants Guild. The trolls didn't trust the guild to actually deliver their goods, so they wanted Dominic to do it for them and make sure that they got what they needed. Most of the goods would be in with the next caravan in a few days, but there were a few that would be better if they were made in Westover, like the stoves. Trolls were extremely vulnerable to fire, but when it came to radiant heat from a stove, it was much less damaging to them. All they needed was for the heat to be less than the ignition point, and they could heal it normally, or relatively normally anyhow. So, they had requested 10 large stoves with the flames completely enclosed, to be made with Magitech. That way, they could use them without fear and not worry about their children being in the kitchen. Dominic knew just what to make for them. A standard Magitech stove, using a fireplace insert for simplicity, but with a bolt holding the grate shut. It didn't need to be opened often anyhow. There was no ash to clear from a Magitech stove, and the grating could be made with small holes, resistant to childish fingers, but still allowing airflow to spread the heat. Dominic was making them out of sheets of clay while he custom-fit armor to the Dave Brigade. There was no sizing chart for mountain trolls, so he had to get one to stand in the forge with him as he made the plates for the first time, and that meant he had to suffer through all the suggestions that an excited mountain troll could come up with. And Dave had plenty of suggestions. Can we draw pretty pictures on them? I want an oak leaf on that leg, and dragonberries on the other. Oh, and if you're making chain skirts anyhow, can they have hooks on the outside to hang stuff? I always need a place to put bags of herbs, and my extra spoon. And that hat, it's no good. I don't know why the human guardians like them. It needs horns. Amy tried not to laugh as Dominic altered the drawings for Dave's armor. Making 50 sets of plate was going to be an adventure on its own. Making 50 sets customized to the tastes of the trolls was going to be even more difficult. And that was without considering the shields they needed. Chapter 446, Armor Dave. By nightfall, Amy had made the stoves, while Dominic had fitted all the plates to Dave and was ready to start the actual enchanting of the armor and weaving the chain sections. Individual stamped links were the best, but Dominic didn't have a machine for that. What he had was very similar to a knitting loom, which would weave the wire into a mesh that would serve the purpose, even if it was easier to destroy in combat. Once it was enchanted, that issue was minimized. So, he wasn't going to burn hundreds of hours making 50 copies of a much more difficult pattern. A few gaps cut in the armor of a mountain troll were much less likely to be fatal than the same weaknesses in the armor of a human. The important part was that the vitals were covered in plate. Dominic created a sand mold for each of the pieces of the plate armor, as all the trolls were very similar in size, and made every Dave's armor at the same time. There was only one custom detail that each piece needed when he finished. It needed him to stamp the names on the front. He didn't have many recipes for fancy armor. It hadn't been his specialty at the forge. But he did have a blueprint for cogwork armor, which would latch itself when it was put on. That would make life easier on the trolls, so that was what Dominic gave it. All that was left was to make many more copies. So many copies that he had to request a shipment of clay from upstream. A full wagon of clay to be delivered to the forges so that he could make all the materials he needed. With the helpful glitch that he had encountered with the quality improvement Magitech orb, he could make far superior metal weapons now. Ones that would cut through goblin flesh even without an enchantment on them. But it would also make incredibly durable armor. How much more durable was something that Pops would know better than Dominic did, but that didn't stop him from making all the plates out of mana steel. It didn't cost him anything to make the higher grade metal, and it held enchantments better, even if all that Dominic had granted the plate was extra durability and added strength, which were easy to do with Magitech. Slowly, the process became part of Dominic's daily routine. Paperwork for an hour in the morning, breakfast, half a day in the forge doing armor and shields for the trolls, half a day doing weapons for Wistover and the Merchants Guild, and then a bit more paperwork after dinner. All work and no play. But in only a few weeks, everything was starting to look up. Dominic had all the armor ready for the guard trolls, who were already wearing their cloth uniforms. He also had a fresh batch of mana steel spears for the armory, 500 of them enchanted to level 6 and uncommon grade, but with extra sharp edges thanks to the improved metal. If they were attacked again, they would be ready. Alexis and the royal guards had gathered for the armoring ceremony, which Dominic had insisted on. Dave was extremely excited to get full armor, so he wanted to make a big deal of giving them their new equipment. "Are you sure that this is wise?" Colonel Wilkes whispered as Dominic prepared to begin. "Of course. Well, mostly. The king didn't specifically say that we couldn't hire trolls to guard the manor, and they're only prohibited from the royal army, not from town guard forces, so it shouldn't be a violation of protocol." The royal guard chuckled. That was the same conclusion he had come to once he had started to look into the laws regarding non-human soldiers. "All right, everyone line up." Dominic began. "As the most impressive guards of the Wistover Manor, I have prepared new uniform equipment for you all." Dominic walked down the line, setting out the armor plates and shields. If you put the armor against your body and give it just a little mana, it will lock itself in place. No need for fancy straps or tiny fingers. Now, everyone can put your new armor on to check the fit. The sound of clanking metal filled the courtyard as the trolls rushed to get themselves ready, and Dominic rolled out a large mirror so they could inspect themselves, and not just each other, even if they were nearly identical. Alexis laughed softly as the trolls hefted shields that were larger than she was and brandished massive spiked clubs in their other hand. "How does it feel?" Dominic asked, checking their fitment. "Good armor, boss. Fits just right. The shields are still the best. The soldiers taught us how to shield wall last big fight, and these are perfect. They even have shield magic so I can shield while I shield." Dave agreed. "Well, when you put it that way, is there a reason that they have horns?" Alexis asked as she examined the design of the armor. "They specifically requested them." "Was there a reason? I mean, other than that they thought the horns looked cool." Dominic shook his head. "Nope, that was the reason. But I also put their names on the armor, and they got to pick the designs on their shin guards." They were right. The horns make them look very impressive, though the choice of curled mountain goat horns is a bit unusual for armor. If they want to headbutt something, it should be just right, though. I reinforced the helmets for exactly that reason." "Of course you did." Colonel Wilkes laughed at the princess' resigned tone. There was no changing the uniforms now. The mountain trolls were in love with the armor. But now that he'd seen them fully equipped as heavy infantry, he wouldn't want to. Marching a unit behind a shield wall like that would absolutely terrify nearly any army on the continent. Chapter 447. Dave on Parade. Seeing the armored trolls on the manor walls brought many of the locals out to spectate. The quality of the armor was incredible, and the novelty of massive trolls with heavy shields and clubs gave them a sense of security, even though they didn't live within the manor. If they could see it, then there was a good chance that they could get to it in the event of emergency, and many of them had done exactly that during the last attack. There was an armory warehouse there, technically a storage shed behind the barracks. If you were closer to there than to the training grounds and sheriff's office, where the other militia armory was, it was the best option. The farmers and hunters simply kept the spears at their house, but for the sake of safety and simplicity, those in town rarely did. All that was left was to make improved weapons for Dave. The trolls all had their spiked clubs, but Dominic knew that they should have an edged weapon as well. He had plenty of minotaur blades, which were mostly common quality magical weapons, and the right size for the trolls. But they could do better. The problem was that it took a massive amount of material to make blades for someone that strong. That was why Dominic had put it off in the first place, and now that they had their shields, with the Flaming Blades spell on it, they didn't desperately need high-quality weapons. They could rely on the magic. Perhaps he could make them better clubs? If he had the woodcarvers shape some logs and then drove mana steel spikes into them, along with some magitech circuitry, he could likely make them into a decent magical weapon. A bigger, better bashing tool. The carpenters were even at the manor, watching the spectacle of the trolls on patrol, before everyone headed off to work. Dominic waved them over, and met them far enough from the wall that Dave wouldn't immediately hear his plans. "Gentlemen, I have a rush project for you. How many trees can you cut me in a day? I want to make new clubs for Dave and Larry. That's 50 in total, about the size of their current ones. I'll upgrade them with metal spikes and then enchant them with a magitech buff. It's the last thing that they need to be fully equipped heavy infantry before the next attack." He quietly explained. "There is another attack?" One of the men asked, slightly panicked. "Most likely. There's always another attack. Either it will be Dagos again, or wandering monsters, or someone else who wants our good stuff. But there is bound to be another attack eventually." The man sighed deeply and patted sweat from his brow with a handkerchief. "You had me concerned there for a moment. If it's just the clubs, we can cut them and rough shape them for you today, no problem. We've been clearing trees too close to the new developments anyhow. They're all ash trees, nice hardwood to make clubs." The other woodcutters nodded. "We can prioritize that for the day. Nobody will object to a small delay to get the trolls what they need. They saved a lot of lives during the last battle, and very few in town would give them whatever they asked for at this point, even if the only thing that seems to interest them is goats." The locals chuckled at their various memories of the trolls' interactions with sheep and goats. It was definitely goats or soup that they liked best. Dominic was about to head back into the manor when Rill, the Merchant Guild's branch leader, caught up to him. "Your Grace, might we have a word in private? Business matters," he asked. "Of course. Why don't you follow me inside? We can bring the Duchess into the negotiations. She often has great insights into matters related to city development." The merchant followed Dominic into the manor, while one of his daughters followed silently behind them with a briefcase in her hands. That should be the business proposal that the guild had prepared. Dominic knew that once it was ready and prepared, they didn't like to put it into a storage device so that it couldn't be easily substituted. With the paper in a briefcase, more than one person could see that it was not being tampered with. Both parties would read it over before signing, but it remained as standard practice. Dominic grabbed Alexis on their way to the office, diverting her from wherever she had been heading. "The merchant has an idea," he explained, as the merchant visibly paled. Did Dominic have to drag the princess away from other work for this? It certainly increased the stress that came with his proposal. Dominic took a seat in the office and pulled Alexis down into his lap, while the merchant smiled. Perhaps the Duke had just been looking for a reason to flirt with his wife. He hadn't. Dominic had brought her because she really did have the best insights into business plans and practical implementation of new projects. The flirting was just a bonus. "What did you have for us today?" Dominic asked, getting down to business. "I have a formal request and business plan from the guild to open an airship manufacturing shop near Westover." The logical spot would be near the existing docks, but I have a full business plan for you. It came in with the caravan that arrived this morning, and if the response is positive, they can send experts with the next caravan to begin stocking the factory. Rill began. Experts from where? Alexis asked. Airship engineers were in extremely short supply everywhere, and if they were planning to poach them from another nation, it could cause issues. From the guild. They have requested a transfer from the kingdom of Heir. We're not poaching someone who is gainfully employed elsewhere, if that was the concern. Excellent. That was my first concern. Chapter 448. Dreams on the Run. Alexis slid the proposal across the desk and opened the pages so she could see exactly what they were planning. I see here that they are not airship engineers. According to the plan, it is a group of dwarven blacksmiths that they plan to transfer. She noted. Rill rubbed the back of his neck. Well, you see, that is true. But they really want to make airships. They heard that we're expanding operations here, and their hometown won't approve their project on safety grounds. The merchant paused, while Alexis laughed. And the only person you could think of who would approve potentially explosive experimentation within his territory was Duke Westover, right? I can't even say that you're wrong. He will likely approve of it, but not so close to the airship docks. If they're going to be experimenting with new designs, including lightened hydrogen airships, I don't want them anywhere near the working vessels. There is a perfectly good spot across the river where they could work and only risk the surrounding farms. Not even the farmhouses, if we place it right. While she talked, Alexis continued to read through the proposal. It looks like they're also trained mages. How did you get approval from the local branch of the guild to move them? I know how hard it is to get a Grandmaster Mage transferred, much less at the same time as a group of mastersmiths. Rill paused for a few seconds, trying to come up with an answer that Alexis would accept. Then, he sighed and decided that she wasn't going to buy any lie that took him that long to come up with. So, he went for the truth. The guild gave them permission to leave. But the king didn't. You see, they may or may not be wanted fugitives at the moment. May or may not. Rill nodded. We don't know if the king is going to make the situation public or not, as it involves a member of his family. But it was imperative that we get them out of the country, which is already in process. Now, we just need somewhere for them to go, and they're perfect for this project. Dominic flipped the pages, letting Alexis read through the plan with him as she considered her options. The project looked good, as far as Dominic could tell. They could use an airship development team. But this particular team could be problematic. Not because of lack of skills, but because someone might come looking for them. Someone with money and armies. Alexis took out a notepad and began to write as she flipped backward through the proposal. Finally, she set her pen down and swatted Dominic's hand off her thigh. All right, I see a few major issues here. First, the location, which we already discussed. That can be changed, so it's not a major issue. Second, there is no indication here that the team you want to send knows anything at all about airships. If they do not, we will want a guarantee that you will supplement or replace them at guild expense. I won't approve a major expansion that will simply sit idle for lack of qualified workers. Third is the team's background. You will have to arrange all new identities for them before they arrive. If anyone from Heir finds out that they are working as engineers for Signia, there will be hell to pay, and neither the king nor the guild will back us up. That's as good as losing the team, since they will be forced to run again if they're not caught. Rill nodded. That won't be an issue. We can set them up with a whole new identity and backstory. We can even have them arrive from another direction so that their path is not as easy to trace. What is most important to the guild is that they don't lose these assets and that they can find somewhere that they can work. They really do want to build airships. They're the cool new thing in Magitech circles, and there are a number of theories about how to make storage space where houses aboard them practical and affordable. Alexis smiled. Just having people carry storage rings wasn't good enough? It's an option, but it's considered to be less secure than having the storage be attached to the airship. Rill agreed. So there is a solid reason for it. The major limitation to airships is their cargo capacity. It's what limited us the most when we were making the gunships. There are other considerations as well. For example, if you put cannon shot in storage, then pull it out to fire, The weight suddenly appearing can put major stress on the airship and change the balance. But the major issue was the weight and the limited volume of storage items. Though, the Duskblades sect does pretty well with them. Dominic noted. That is a good point. The sect might be able to help with the design. As I understand it, the largest issue is that the airships need access and you can't walk into a storage bag. Rill agreed. Alexis smiled. Why don't I call one over? Amy should be somewhere in the house still. She got out of Dominic's lap before she was even finished speaking and left the room to go find the mage, who was likely to know the answer to their dilemma. They returned a few minutes later, and the smile on Amy's face told Rill and Dominic that they had overlooked something very important. All right, we'll start with the basics. Do you know how to break a storage device? She asked. Dominic shook his head, but Rill nodded. You just need to damage the bag sufficiently for the runes to shatter. Amy nodded, which is naturally a threat to an airship as well. But there is another way. You can force open an unbound storage device. In fact, a trained mage can do it from quite some distance. So, if you use a storage-type spell on the airship, ignoring the issue of not being able to enter with living items, any mage that it flies over could pop it like a loot piñata. Not only that, but if the spells on the hull are damaged, it might drop its entire cargo in combat. That's why nobody does it. Chapter 449. Worth trying too. When she put it that way, it made a lot more sense that they didn't enchant the airship itself to hold cargo like a storage bag. Alright, then I'm sure that there are alternate options. The team might not be here yet, but we can prepare for them. The shop for them can be constructed so that it's less suspicious to anyone watching, and we can likely start gathering materials. That way, we will be ready to start when they arrive, and anyone watching will think that we already had the engineers here for weeks. Dominic suggested. That's actually a great idea. If we make the world think that we're ramping up to make airships, they won't even notice when they arrive, as everyone will assume that we arranged hiring in advance. Rill realized. That's the hope. One more industry for Westover is always a good thing, especially when it's shipping related. Dominic agreed. The guild had mentioned that they were having issues with ground shipping lately, so an upgraded version of the commercial airships, which were only minimally magic and mostly relied on steam turbines and basic magitech boilers, would be a blessing to everyone. Do you really think that it will be viable? Or will they end up just making airships with different materials? Rill asked. Amy shrugged. I think that they can do better. The airships we're using are a decades-old design with only minor upgrades to make them combat-capable. Mostly, that was just because of the cannons, not because we significantly changed the airships. Do you have any objections to letting us arrange the shop while you work on new identities for the workers? We can only do so much for them without causing an incident, so it's all on the guild to make them vanish before they get here. Dominic insisted. Alexis nodded in agreement. Plausible deniability is everything if they're in trouble with an allied royal family. Why not use a portal? Check them into a hotel and send them to the middle of the desert, then here. Nobody will be able to track them that way. The two portals will interfere with the tracking spell. That would get them to us faster than expected, and without them being followed. Amy suggested. Rill drummed his fingers on the desk. That could work. I don't know if they know the portal spell, but their lack of traveling will cause issues. If the sect is willing to assist, then we can arrange it. Amy nodded. We will arrange for the sect to move some people between countries. We have members who have been where you need to be. Go talk to the elders, and they will know what to do. Alexis nodded. I will arrange the teams to build the facility, starting today. If the mages were going to bring the workers so soon, they needed to get the facility ready for them, before anyone realized that they were missing. Fortunately, Rill had plans. Once the guild had contacted him to help house the fleeing group, he had already started to arrange teams to distract followers and find ways to get the mages safely out of the country. Now, they would have a different objective. They would pretend to be the team and take a caravan out of the city, while the actual refugees left by portal. By the time that anyone realized the switch, the true location of the exchange would be unclear. We should get more mages, like a whole second sect. With that many of us, nobody would even question how many magical industries we had in town. Amy suggested. And you think that they are so easy to come by? Alexis asked. Amy nodded. They're easier to find than you might expect. The issue is that they're territorial, and getting two sects to live near the same city and coexist is the hard part. The Duskblade sect has a solid reputation, and we're strong. But we're also mercenaries. If you brought a research sect, it should cause few issues, and they could help us with advanced education. Don't go for one that was running an academy. That would step on the elders' fingers. But if you got one that didn't really interact with the outside world, it would be fine. There are a number of them hiding out in the wilderness without a proper home of their own, as they're afraid to build a permanent structure and be attacked. Alexis smiled. You sound like you have someone in mind. Well, a group of someones. Amy shrugged. There are a few, but I don't actually know which ones would be good choices. I can tell you which ones we've never been sent to deal with, but someone else would know better which one would be a good fit for the town instead of integrating them into the Duskblade sect. Right? I forgot that you could do that. If there are more mages, obviously you would want them in the Duskblade sect, but you can only do so much to hide a group that is in trouble with another nation when your sect is so public now. Dominic realized.
Exactly.
With us running the school and being the face of the city, it's more important that we keep a good public face. Or so the elders tell me. Her voice had a definite tone of, I have been warned more than once, but she did also work with Dominic in the forge all day, so they would certainly have been concerned that she might give the sect a bad reputation if she didn't work out as his assistant. Given her personality, that was definitely the best call for the sect elders, but they hadn't really been given much of a choice in the matter, as Amy had basically decided that it was going to happen, and she was the best option to work with Dominic among the sect members. Alexis sighed as she realized it was time to get actual work done. All right, let's break up this meeting and get the day started. Dominic, you can let go of me now. Chapter 450. Competent Help. 2 hours later, Dominic and Amy found themselves in the middle of a stone-covered field, looking at the location that the infrastructure team had identified as the best spot for an airship factory and repair shop. It wouldn't interfere with the working docks. It was far enough that it wouldn't endanger them if an incoming vessel was in danger of fire or explosion, and it wasn't workable land that someone would want to work one day. All right. I don't know what needs to go inside, but I can certainly approve of the location. Is there anything that we need beyond the building? I'm not an expert in airship manufacturing. Dominic asked the team leader. Not much. They'll need a gantry for the construction, and we will need to arrange shipments of raw materials, especially the cloth for the envelope. Treating it to hold air, or using a synthetic plastic are the usual ways, but I'm also not an expert. He replied with a shrug. Well, I'm sure that we can get it all sorted out once the team is here. I will have a shipment of clay sent over, and then they can work out the transmutation spells. Getting the spell gems might not be easy or cheap, but it's certainly not impossible. Amy nodded. We have people with connections for that. If we need more transmutations, we can get them. Aluminum, copper, and steel we have for sure. But anything rare is going to be a special order from another sect. Those were the basics that most sects would have, but many of the airships were covered in brass, which was either made in-house by the smiths, or with magic by a sect that specialized in it. Dominic didn't see the reason. It was mostly cosmetic. But that was hard to argue against. The sort of people who could afford an airship cared about appearances. All right, let's get at least some walls up today. Dominic announced. The infrastructure team nodded. No worries, Your Grace. We will stake it out and get the building shell up today. If you have other matters to deal with, you can work on them. Dominic frowned. There were too many things to do today, and even more that he likely hadn't thought of yet. Why don't we go see the farmers? The whole area was trampled, so there is certainly some repair work to do. Amy suggested. The trolls that had followed them nodded eagerly. They were happy to help rebuild gardens. They had only sent 10 trolls for this outing, as they thought it was only security, but they could get more if they needed them. 10 men also patrolled the manor walls at any given time, but they could call at least another 10 out. 20 mountain trolls was enough for them to repair entire farms at a time, but the damage didn't look as bad as they had feared. This side of town was trampled, and the monster corpses were still being cleared out and piled for destruction. But the fields were only starting to sprout, and even where they were trampled, many of them were starting to stand back up again. The trolls revived the resilient young plants as they passed by, and the farms began to look better within seconds. All that Dominic was going to have to do was check for building damage, so he knew that nobody was going to be stuck with a leaky roof. The sect and the other craftsmen in town who could use the transmutation type spells were doing the same all over the territory, but Dominic had the trolls with him to fix some of the gardens while he checked to see how much had been lost from storage. "Morning, young miss. Is your mom home?" he joked as an elderly lady opened the door to the next farmhouse. In fact, she stepped out for a moment. "No suitors today," the old lady replied with a grin. "I have come to see how the storage fared before the wet season. The trolls are helping with the field damages, but I want to check if anyone had heard of families who might have taken heavy losses, either to battle or to their storage." Dominic explained. "Well, this side of town is pretty good. We were further from the majority of the fighting, and there aren't even a lot of farms here to attract the monsters. The only section that fared better was the other side of the river, and I don't recall that they got any portals at all. If you head off in that direction, though, the Jones family lost 3 sons in the fighting. They might need some help." The old lady insisted. "All right, I will go check on them. Thanks for your assistance." Dominic followed her directions, stopping at a few more farms and getting the same response. They were all right, but the Joneses had lost 3 boys. So, it was no shock when the matriarch of the Jones family was waiting out on the porch by the time that they arrived. "Your Grace, to what do we owe the honor of this visit?" she asked. "We came to see who had suffered heavy losses, either to the farms or to the family. We will help where we can, but I am told by the neighbors that you lost 3 boys. The woman, who was in her later middle years and just starting to turn gray in the hair, nodded sadly. My 5 oldest are all in the militia, and 3 of them took up spears to defend the farm until the army could get here. The rest of the family evacuated into town, but they were last to retreat and fell to ogres," she explained. "I can't bring your boys back, but I can help you with supplies if you've lost them. There is a death benefit for militiamen as well. It will be out soon, though it's little consolation." The woman gave him a sad smile. "You would know, I suppose. Your family was at Westover when it fell, were they not?" Dominic nodded. "They were. I still owe Dagos and their allies for that. Soon, we will settle accounts. But first, I want to see Westover stable and happy again."